Well, I should start out before I start the actual program and say that I have a pretty good friend. He's a member of the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club, as I am, and his name is Dick Snow. And he's a retired teacher, retired coach and stuff. And for decades, he would save these articles about fishing in various places because he thought, you know, when I retire, I'm going to go fish these places. And he's retired now, and he's with a passion. He's been out there going to different places, and I'm one of these guys who just every time he says, "Would you like to go with me?" I just say yes. So he has always wanted to go and fish the Blackfeet reservation in Montana, and so we did that earlier this year, and it was a lot of fun. So we'll go through the program, but this is not a formal thing. So if you have questions about anything occurs to you at all, just stop me so we can talk about it. You don't have to hold your questions to the end. So what are we going to talk about? We'll talk about, you know, obviously fishing in Montana and fishing at the Blackfeet lakes, and you know, how do you get there? Where do you stay? There's a bunch of lakes. There's maybe 10 lakes or so there that have pretty nice fish in them. So talk a little bit about how to pick a lake. We'll talk about the various, you know, gear that you need. We'll talk about flies. And since I have pictures of stuff like buffalo, we'll talk about flora and fauna and things like that. Before we do that, though, we have to sort of at least get a couple of pictures of fish so we know what we're really talking about, because that's sort of the point. And this is a pretty nice fish that Rick Bowser, who's a member of the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club, this is a pretty nice fish that he caught in Mission Lake there on the Blackfeet reservation. And this is Gary Medema, who's another member of the club who was with us. We had 4 people. We had Dick Snow, myself, Gary, and Rick. And you can't actually see the fish, but it's
It just started.
it's pretty large.
You guys start early?
We did start
I don't think
early.
anybody was
Sure
showing up.
late. Oh, good. Where's the pizza?
Nobody
At
told me.
the pizza place.
We started early, there's no pizza. That's okay.
Must be a fishing meeting.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. We can start again if you'd like. We
No,
can go
we're
to the
fine.
very beginning.
No, go right ahead.
You've only actually missed this. That's the very beginning.
Okay.
Here's what we'll talk about. It's the Blackfeet reservation in northern Montana, and we'll just kind of talk about, you know, how to get there, you know, what the stuff you need, what you need to buy, things like that. This is the kind of fish that are there. There's some pretty good sized ones. There's a lot of fish in the lake that are maybe up to 8 pounds or so in this particular lake, Mission Lake. So, you know, you can have lots of fun. So again, Gary Medema with a pretty nice fish. Getting there is pretty easy. We ended up going 2 different ways. We took Highway 2 through Washington and Idaho and into Montana, and then we came back mostly on I-90. And I-90 is easily an hour, maybe even an hour and a half quicker than taking Highway 2. So, you know, where you can see this is the Blackfeet reservation there on the right-hand side. It's right next to Glacier National Park, if you know where Glacier National Park is. And it's also right near Canada. You know, basically the neighbor to the north is Canada. So it was interesting to me because we got there and we're fishing, and there are all these Canadians, and I had never had this experience where people were actually coming somewhere I was to fish as opposed to me going to Canada to fish. I've spent most of my life going to British Columbia because the fish are bigger and all of that stuff, and all these guys in Alberta, they just really like to go to the Blackfeet reservation, because the fish are bigger, so, you know, I guess it's all perspective, but it was absolutely fun. So, the first thing to talk about, couple of rules. The first thing you need to do is, you know, like anywhere else, is you need to buy a license. I realize as I'm saying this that I don't think they sell licenses online, but I could be wrong. I think you actually have to go to the town of Browning, which is right there by that red star. That's the main town in the reservation, is Browning. So you have to go to Browning and buy a license, and they have licenses for, I think they have a 3-day license, and I guess you could buy a couple of 3-day licenses. We were fishing for 7 days, so we ended up buying it was just cheaper to just buy an annual license. And the actual license was $70 for an annual fishing license, and then there was a $10 conservation fee, and I'm not quite sure what it was for, but basically if you buy a license, it's going to cost you $80. The other thing they do that's a little different than Washington is they're really worried about getting invasive species into their waters. So if you go there, before you can actually fish, they want to inspect your waders, your wading boots. They want to inspect your boat or your float tube or your pontoon boat. They basically want to look at everything just to see if there's the possibility that you could have some kind of invasive species that you're going to.
So where do they do this at?
They have little checking stations. In this particular, we ended up staying in Cut Bank, which is just out of the reservation. And right near the town of Cut Bank, as you enter the reservation, there's this little checking station off the main road, and it has this little flag there and this little sculpture and stuff. And we had to stop there and just have them, and we took basically everything out of our truck and had them kind of go through it and look at it. Took us maybe, I don't know, at least a half hour or so.
It's common throughout Montana.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we went to Glacier a
Any of the
couple
major
years
rivers,
ago.
they have posted big signs that said there's a pull-out area. Then they have volunteers there. In fact, I met one guy who was a volunteer, it was from Whidbey Island, and he retired over there just to do this, you know, kind of thing, so.
Well, and I think it's a good idea, and they were pretty nice about it, and pretty quick about it. The thing that I thought was really weird is the day that we had this checked, it was the first day we were gonna fish, the first thing we did was we had them check all our stuff, and we drove into Browning and bought our licenses, and we were driving somewhere else in Browning, and we thought, we have no idea where the heck we are. So we actually stopped where we saw a police car, and we stopped in this parking lot, and we went, my buddy Dick went over to talk to the police officer. He said, boy, this is interesting. He said, I just got a call about you on my radio. And Dick said, what? He said, well, you apparently drove past one of our checking stations and they saw your pontoon boat over your car, and they knew they hadn't checked that today, and so they called us on, and they wanted me to go out and find you and stop you, and I'm thinking, well, you know, I mean, how many times do you need to be checked? You know, we were checked like, it was less than an hour before, so they apparently don't talk to each other, don't have a way to talk to each other.
We got checked
at the station.
last month in Washington. They got them over eastern Washington now too, up in the northeast part of the state. We were up by Walker Lake in that region coming down, and we got checked.
And I want to say I saw that when we were going. I want to say I saw it in Idaho
Yeah.
as well. But this was the first place where they seemed to be really, really serious about it. And again, I think it's a good thing that they're checking and trying to stop this, you know, the spread of weird stuff. One of the things that's really helpful if you go and fish these lakes is an old paperback book. It's probably been in print for 10 years anyway, maybe 15 or so. And you know, the first thing you might wonder is, why should I buy a 15-year-old book? But it's really helpful, if nothing else, it's really helpful in finding the lakes. one of the problems we had, there's maybe 10 different lakes that have pretty big fish in them. And one of the problems we had was we'd go out on these, I assume they're ranches, we'd just basically be out in these really vast areas where you're on these dirt roads and you wouldn't know where the heck you're going, and there'd be like a little side dirt road that everyone knows goes to the lake you want to go to, but there's no sign that says anything at all. And if you've got this book, it'll basically say, well, as you've gone 2.4 miles on this road, look for this off on the right, look for this side road. It was really helpful because the first day we got there, we drove way past where we should be, and then we saw basically a cowboy out there doing something. He was fixing one of the fences or something. We stopped and asked him. He said, "Oh no, you need to go back this far and look here." And so we went on the side road where he told us to be, and we stopped, and there was sort of a cattle gate, and right on the cattle gate was just a tiny piece of a sign. They'd torn off all of the sign, but there was a little tiny piece that said lake on it. It didn't even have the name, it didn't have the name of the lake or anything. But so it's one of those things where, I guess things happen, but having this book was really helpful to get a sense of what at least had been in the lake in the past, how big the lakes were, are they in sort of a more of an alpine area, a high mountain area, or are they a little lower? You at least get basic sense of that. There's an awful lot of lakes to choose there. Again, at least 10 or so. And it used to be that the big lake on the Blackfeet reservation used to be Duck Lake. And if you're an old guy like me, you probably read magazine articles and stuff about them pulling fish out of Duck Lake that were 8, 10, 12 pounds. They'd get these gigantic fish, and it's mostly because Duck Lake, at least in the past, used to be just absolutely loaded with scuds, and it just had fish that just grew to monstrous size. Duck Lake isn't very good anymore, and no one seems to know why. There's a real die-off of a lot of their scuds, so whether it got some weird chemicals in the lake or some other problem, but Duck Lake is not the big lake anymore. Probably the best lake is Mission Lake. That's probably the best one, but there are a lot of different ones. Some of them have, like Geese Lake is a pretty nice lake, and it has really big cutthroat, so if you like to catch cutthroat, you might want to go there. Some of the lakes have brook trout in them. Dog Gun Lake has brook trout, and some of them are pretty nice. I always want to say gun dog. I don't understand why you would call a lake gun dog, or excuse me, Dog Gun Lake as opposed to Gun Dog Lake. I'm not quite sure why. I keep wanting to make it.
I thought it was a typo.
No. That may have started things, but this is Dog Gun Lake. It was the first lake we went to, and it taught us one thing, that sometimes it can be too windy to fish, and this is very emblematic of a lot of the lakes on the Blackfeet reservation. Is they're in these areas where the winds just blow really strong, and you just can't get away from them. And the day that we went, first day we actually fished, this was almost too hard to fish. That's my friend Dick Snow, by the way. He's getting ready to go out and fish and have a sandwich and stuff. This isn't too bad, but yet it's bad enough. And I was saying earlier that you really, I think, to fish these lakes, you really need a decent, a small pram, some kind of decent reel boat. Having a pontoon boat isn't bad, but I took a really lightweight, float tube, and it was just terrible trying to fish in any kind of winds at all. You just get blown all over the place. And one of the things that you can do, we didn't do the short version is we didn't do very well at Dog Gun Lake, but I'm told it has some pretty nice fish in it. One of the things you can do in fishing any of these lakes is to try to find a spot on the lake that either has a pretty good hillside and fish from shore so that the winds are going kind of over your head, or it seemed like every single one of these lakes just had a trail around the whole lake, and you could just basically figure out, well, let's leave the wind at my back and just fish from shore and do okay.
Do you have any rattlesnakes or anything, or?
You know, I didn't see any. I'm sure there are. I didn't see any. That didn't seem to be an issue. And again, this is mostly, grass, prairie, so you're not sort of, a lot of areas where you can't see what's in front of you. The grass isn't real high or anything when it's right near the lake. So in terms of stuff you need, just like we're talking about, you can fish from shore if you want. And a lot of people did fish from shore. It was really odd for me because I'm so used to being from Washington. I'm so used to just, put my boat in the lake or my float tube or whatever, my pontoon boat, and fishing, as opposed to going to a lake and fishing from shore. I've always had so much better luck when I've had some kind of a boat, and I think you really need something like that, because these lakes are pretty large. Some of them are, 700 acres or so, pretty good sized. Duck Lake, I think, is 1,400 acres, so they're some pretty massive lakes, and a pontoon boat is probably about the minimum. I wouldn't take a float tube. I would take at least a pontoon boat, and I would actually, if I go again, I would prefer to have a small boat that I can have a fish finder in, so I can, more easily find the fish, and it's nice to either have an electric motor or something like that, so you can zip around and really look at things carefully. So,
do they have places to rent boats and equipment there?
not that I found. And I'm trying to think, because I didn't see, I didn't see, there's nothing like that on any of the lakes, for sure. And I don't think there are shops that rent boats, but there are a couple of fly shops that might do that. But it's not, you'd have to go sort of talk somebody into it. There's no obvious place that says boats for sale. So they kind of, I ended up using a 5-weight rod because that's what I almost always use, and I've got most of my lines are 5-weight, and the rods that I really like to use in lakes are 5-weight. So I use that, but I would say a 6-weight outfit would be better, would be ideal, because most of these fish, most of them are about 3 pounds to 6 or 8 pounds, and you don't catch too many fish smaller than 3 pounds, and so it is nice to have a 6-weight outfit if you can do that. And obviously you need a reel with a good drag system. That's kind of important, and maybe 100 yards or so. 20-pound backing is good. The lakes themselves is a little odd there, and I don't know if this is true in all of Montana. I doubt that it is, but an awful lot of lakes on the Indian reservation were real shallow. Some of them weren't any deeper than about 10 or 11 feet, and they don't seem to, at least the ones we were fishing at, don't seem to have big problems with winter kill or anything like that. some of the lakes are pretty good-sized impoundment lakes, and they're, you know, using the water and stuff like that. And they have either springs in them, or they have streams that go through them. So it seems like there's probably enough moving water, even in the winter, to keep most of these lakes alive and keeps most of the fish alive. And I'm saying that because you don't really need a lot of sinking lines. I either used a floating line with a strike indicator on it, or I used an intermediate line to fish nymphs and stuff like that, without having to get too deep. If I needed to get down, you know, 10 feet or so, I just basically used my floating line and used a strike indicator, and that seemed to work pretty good. So flies, that was probably the toughest thing, and I don't think we really figured it out, and it surprised me because I went with, you know, 3 other guys who were pretty good fly fishers, and we fished together quite a lot. And what I found, we fished all over British Columbia, all over Washington, and what I found is usually between the 4 of us, it takes us, you know, usually not more than a couple days, and we can figure out, okay, this is what they're feeding on, this is really what they want, this is what's hatching, and just get a good sense of that. I can't say that we ever really did that at the Blackfeet lakes, and I just don't have enough experience to know what we did wrong. But one thing I know that does work for sure is scud, because all of these lakes in the Blackfeet reservation, the reason they have big fat fish in them is they're eating scuds all winter long. You know, they have plenty to eat. And in Washington, it seems like, or at least in eastern Washington, it seems like to me, a lot of the lakes with good fish have scuds in them. But then in the spring, they're really focusing on things like mayflies and damselflies and other things that are hatching. It seems like they're almost saying, well, we're tired of eating scuds all winter long, we're gonna eat these other things. But that didn't seem to be the case in Montana. It seemed like if we had something that looked like a scud, we caught some fish. There were some mayflies hatching, and we fished an awful lot of mayflies and caught only a few fish. We were too early for the damselfly hatch. It hadn't really started yet. I suspect when the damselflies are hatching there, that they're probably pretty good.
Was there a lot of, was there any areas where there were cattails and stuff, or was it, I just noticed the picture, was it pretty void of that kind of thing? Were they just
Mostly, as Mission Lake has one end, pretty much and I get my sort of directions all screwed up, but pretty much the west end of Mission Lake is pretty shallow and has a lot of cattails, and that there were some fish there, and it was pretty decent. But otherwise, there doesn't seem to be a lot of, you know, look at these lakes, and again, they're fairly shallow, and it doesn't look like there's just a lot of, you know, there aren't a lot of sunken logs, there just aren't a lot of structure, there aren't a lot of, you know, rocky points and stuff. There are some points that, you know, work, but it just, it was a little bit hard to figure out. It was different than what I'm used to seeing both in British Columbia and then here in this state. Leeches worked pretty well, but again, they weren't, you know, it wasn't like I put a leech on and all of a sudden I'm just catching a ton of fish. You catch a few fish. Damsels, they were, even though the damsels weren't hatching in any numbers, they would take a damsel occasionally. They would take a Calabatus nymph occasionally. Didn't do very well on dragonfly nymphs, but I did see some dragonflies flying around. The one thing I would recommend is that you take your fly tying kit with you, because you just never know what is going to happen. But this is a look at one of my boxes with scuds, and it turned out virtually every scud I had was too big. And a lot of those that are in there, you can't sort of tell for sure, but a lot of those are size 14 that are in there, and that was too big. You'd look and you'd see these giant scuds, and you'd think, well, that's what I'm putting on. You'd put it on, you'd fish for an hour, and you wouldn't catch a thing. And then you'd try a leech or something like that, and you'd finally get a fish, and you'd pump it, and you'd see what's in his belly, and it had these, it'd have like 40 of these really small, like size 16 scuds in it. And that's what they really wanted, it seemed like, were these small
With that color.
scuds. They're an olive color, they're sort of maybe a paler, more of a watery olive with some gray in it, sort of a grayish olive sort of thing. That's a little bit too green. They were sort of the color of, I don't know if you can see it, but just on the right-hand side, there's a fairly, almost on the right-hand side, the second, it's not the furthest on the right, but it's the second row there. If you look at the top of it, there's sort of a pale green scud, and it was kind of that color. That's kind of what they wanted. And this is my box of mayflies, which I really savage trying to get them to eat mayflies, and it turned out the only thing they wanted was something that had a lot of peacock in it. Like you can see on the far, in the middle column there on the far right hand side, you can see one with a sort of a peacock body in it, and that was, they were sort of half interested in that. This is a similar one that had at least a peacock thorax, and they seem to like that too. What they really liked, for reasons I don't fully understand, was my friend Dick was talking about, he's obsessed with this fly, and again, I don't understand that either, but it's a Welsh fly, and it's called a dalbach. And it's an old traditional fly from Wales, and all it is just sort of a bunch of peacock with a little pheasant tail in it. And for odd reasons, that's what the fish wanted. And if you could say, yeah, they're fishing a dalbach, I bet you could say that to 100 people, and not a single one would actually have that fly. But that's why I say take your fly box, because the next day we all tied up these small dalbachs, in size 16 and in size 14, and we were catching fish, and we weren't catching them in crazy numbers, but we were catching them. And it seemed like, what we were doing was we were using a floating line and a strike indicator, and we were in areas that were kind of weedy, but were only maybe about, 10 feet deep or so, and we were putting them down about 9 feet, just right above the top of the weeds. And it seemed like little pods of fish would come by, and we'd catch, 2 or 3 fish, and then we wouldn't catch anything for, say, 20 minutes or so, and then we'd catch a few more. So I think there were some groups of fish that were just sort of coming through, and then they'd kind of sweep through a little bit later. It wasn't like the fishing was ever crazy. And, I talked a little bit about leech patterns, and, and this isn't anything particularly fancy, but they seem to like these bloody leeches, basically just a sort of a little bit of, red, little bit of red dubbing in there, and some, black mohair and stuff, and then a black marabou tail. Seemed to work pretty well. And this is just stuff. Again, lots of lakes to fish. Mission Lake turned out to we were told that was going to be the best lake because it had more consistent numbers of large fish in it, and that certainly was our experience. We got some fish that were probably, at least 6 pounds anyway, and I think maybe 1 or 2 that were closer to 8 pounds. And I don't think we caught anything that was smaller than about 3 pounds. I don't fully understand where all the smaller ones are, but they're somewhere. And again, that's Rick. That's another nice sized fish. You know, it's certainly in the low to mid-20s. Pretty fat fish, good sized. That's another nice fish. It's funny, you look at that net and it's like, well, could the net be any smaller? But it's just barely handling that fish. And again, as I said, a lot of folks like to fish from shore. That wasn't real helpful for us. Apparently sometimes the fish are really close to shore. Our experience was they were probably about 20-25 feet off from shore, just on the edges of some of the weed beds. There were some weed beds, and not about where he's standing is about where they start, and then they go on for a while and then stop, and then that seemed to be where we were mostly catching our fish. Hidden Lake, you know, it looks a lot like the other lakes, but what we liked about it was we found that it didn't seem to be super windy. We fished it a lot in the evenings when we were coming back to the community of Cut Bank. We ended up stopping at Hidden Lake a lot and fishing for an hour or two because it just seemed like it seemed pretty easy. We did fish it a lot from shore, and we didn't have to really work too hard. It didn't seem to be real windy. I think the wind was dying down in a lot of the evenings, and that certainly helped. And this is probably about a fish that was maybe just a little under 3 pounds, but that's probably the smallest fish that we caught. I don't know why that was again. And this is Hidden Lake again. Not as big. I think it's around 120 acres. And if you wanted to, you could drive around the whole thing. So again, we were in a part of the lake that was a little bit of wind, and we were having the wind at our backs, but if it was, you know, if things had changed, we could have just driven to the other side of the lake and fished it pretty easy. I'll probably ruin the suspense, but the last lake that we went to is called Four Horn Lake, and we had seen some videos on YouTube that showed them catching these monster fish at Four Horn Lake, you know, just big fish, 8-10 pounds. And the kind of the word on the lake was that it had really huge fish, but just not a lot of them. So we were really excited we were going to leave, and did leave Four Horn Lake for our very last day. And it's a 750-acre lake, and we got there and we were the only people fishing the lake. And the spoiler is that we didn't catch a single fish there. Spent the whole day fishing it really hard, didn't catch a single fish, but it was a stunningly beautiful lake. And if we figure out what we did wrong, I want to go back there, because I do believe that, you know, it does have big fish, and they are there, and we just weren't fishing it correctly. We just weren't finding them. This is, in order to get to Four Horn, we drove for a long period of time. So just I don't know if it's an individual ranch or if it's owned by the tribe or whatever, but it's a gigantic ranch, and you just basically drive on, you know, dirt roads like that. You're not going up and down a lot of hills, but those roads, I'm sure when it rains a lot, I'm sure those roads get muddy, and it can be a little, you know, a little dangerous. What we found was, in a lot of places in Montana, you'd be driving around and suddenly the road sort of goes to the right, you know, because there's a whole bunch of ruts and stuff where you're about to go into, so you go off and go to the right and just kind of go over it. But I could see trying to do that when it's raining and creating your own ruts, and things would be kind of nasty.
So are you allowed to camp there?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question, because I would have forgotten to say that, but I think any of those lakes, you can camp, but it costs like $10 a night or something like that, so it's really, costs virtually nothing. And that's a really good point, because if it's, you know, hard to get in and out, you're just much better to go there,
Yeah.
spend the night there and fish, but you have to know that, you know, that there aren't any services, so you gotta bring your own water and bring your own Kent, and all of that stuff.
What time of year were you there? What time were you there? You probably already said that.
About 2 weeks ago,
Oh, 2 weeks ago.
yeah.
Very good year.
So again, it was a little bit early for, and it's hard to tell because the weather is so changeable every year. It was a little bit early for the dams to hatch, which I wish we would have made, but there are a lot of these tiny little lakes on the way into Four Horn that we saw, and it said in the book that a lot of these lakes have fish in them, but we didn't stop, but there are, certainly the cows stop there, but this is Four Horn, this is what it looks like, you know, it's just beautiful. And you can see there's not a single, you know, boat on the lake.
Did you run into people on the other lakes?
A little bit, but much fewer than I would have thought. You know, again, Mission is the big one everyone talks about now, and we always saw at least, I don't know, 10 people on it anyway, but I mean, it's 750 acres, so 10 people is like nothing. I was surprised to see how few people are there. I don't think enough people are fishing it, and it just seems to me to be a wonderful opportunity. I know a couple of guys told me, you know, that they go to Montana with some regularity, and if I did that, especially if I was going to be in northern Montana, I'd be doing a little bit of fishing.
So here's another question for you. Could I haul a drift boat with me on those roads? If I'm fishing in one of the rivers over there and I have a drift boat with me?
I don't see, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay.
It's, you know,
Carry a lot of gear in a drift boat.
I mean, it's one of those things where if it's really rainy and crummy and muddy, you're gonna be, it's gonna be awful. But it's gonna be awful whether you have a drift boat or whether you don't have a drift
Right.
boat. So it's, you know, taking the drift boat isn't really the factor. And again, the stick snow just sort of waiting fishing from shore, looking for
Carry a lot of
stuff.
gear in a drift boat.
Well, you can, and they're pretty nice. The one thing that I was thinking about is a drift boat, if you're rowing and the wind is relentless, could be a little unpleasant.
I could put electric motor in mine now.
But that would be, if you've got some kind of a motor, that would work.
Yeah.
So anyway, lots of wildflowers and stuff like that. I didn't realize, it just shows how ignorant I am about fauna, but I didn't realize that there's this sort of wild iris that grows in Montana, but it does. And
Did you
it's
see a lot of game?
really pretty. No, I didn't see a lot of game, actually. A little bit of antelope, but not too much. I saw an awful lot of horses, and that would make sense, because it's
Maybe
really,
it was fenced or something.
the prairies, well, they do have a lot of fences there. But the prairies are just really, you know, it's really horse country, and you would expect to see, you're right, you would expect to see a lot of deer or a lot of antelope or, you know, or something like that. I mean, it's perfect for that.
Well, yeah, you know, you go up to where the Missouri is, God, we just saw sheep, antelope, deer.
Yeah, I didn't
I
see,
mean, it went on and on.
yeah, I didn't see
Every day.
any sheep at all, I didn't see as many antelope as I would have expected.
Yeah.
Again, you see horses all over the place, and some of them looked pretty, you know, pretty wild, actually. Saw a lot of white pelicans, there's certainly a lot of those. And again, there's some more pelicans. If I caught more fish, I'd have more fish pictures, but. This was the weirdest thing, this long-billed curlew. And I don't know that I've ever seen any around, but I was reading about them afterward. apparently they can use their big long snout like that, they can use to get down and get earthworms and pull them right out. And I'm thinking, boy, that sounds weird, but, you know, how does that even, you know, what kind of DNA sort of makes that evolve, a bird
A lot of
evolve like
suction
that?
there.
But yeah, it's just sort of weird. I was thinking, you know, gosh, did it like pollen? Was there some big long tube-like flower or something that it, you know, and no, it's earthworms and stuff like that. And a lot of ground squirrels, there were ground squirrels all over the place.
The potholes area has a lot of the curlews. Yeah.
And that's right, you know a lot more about birds than I do. I hadn't
I'm not
really.
saying that, I just said
Well-
I've seen them over there.
Well, no, and yeah, where I was going with that was, I hadn't really seen a lot in eastern Washington, but it would make sense that they would be there. But you do know a lot more about birds than I do. That's also true. Isn't your wife a birder? I was thinking she was.
Yeah, she's a whaler.
A whaler.
She's a bird.
Birds.
So anyway, more ground squirrels. I have a friend of mine who likes to actually go to Montana every year and shoot ground squirrels, and shoots like 1,000 of them. That sounds cruel and rotten until you realize that, you know, a lot of livestock in areas with a lot of ground squirrels, you know, they break their legs and they have all sorts of problems. So the ranchers really like to have people come and if they can, get rid of the ground squirrels so they don't have to use poison or do something weird. And just a lot of buffalo around there.
How were the Indians? Pretty nice?
Well, they were, and it surprised the heck out of me, because I live on the Tulalip Indian Reservation, and I'm not personally an Indian, but I have some good friends who are Indians. And when he heard I was going to the Blackfeet Reservation, he said, well, be used to somebody referring to you as Whidey. And I said, what? He said, well, I'm just certain that you'll go there and you'll have an experience where somebody will, you know, refer to you as Whitey. That'll just be right in your face. And I thought, you know, and he said, be ready for that.
I read the book. If you want to read a great book, read a story. And it's a story of John Jacob Astor's 10 years after Lewis and Clark came out to the coast. Another expedition came out. And it was all about the Blackfeet, trying to get through the Blackfeet. Everybody was terrified of the Blackfeet. All the other tribes wouldn't go through the Blackfeet.
Yeah, they're
And these
pretty.
people, this whole expedition almost died because they tried to avoid going through the Blackfeet country. Because what happened was Lewis and Clark, they killed one of the Blackfeet warriors. That was it. So I mean, after reading that book, I'm thinking Blackfeet, I mean, my God, you don't want to go there. I mean, they were really hostile Indians, man, I'll tell you.
Well, it's funny, when I went in to buy my license, I said, you know, I've been kind of upset. And they said, what? And I said, well, you know, I came here and I was told that I'd be expected to be referred to as Whitey. And I said, no one's referred to me as Whitey at all. You know, and I ended up looking at these guys and I think they didn't know what to say to me, you know. Nobody, you know, laughed and thought that was a funny joke, and nobody said a thing. So I thought, well, I know what they're thinking.
So they drink alcohol in the res?
A lot.
So it's a wet res, okay.
One of the things that I didn't mention is Browning is not the greatest place in the world, by the way. If you're wondering about where to stay, I really didn't like Browning, and I wouldn't recommend that you stay there. And it's not that I don't like, you know, Indians, because again, I live on an Indian reservation right now and enjoy the heck out of it. But Browning is kind of a dirty, ugly town. And so I was staying at Cut Bank, which is a little further away, but it was just I thought it had more restaurants that were nice, and it just was nicer.
So could you put a pointer where Mission Lake is? Put your pointer where you think?
Yeah, I think it's, and I don't actually, I was looking because I see all these sort of lakes around there, but it's basically somewhere,
Between the two?
yeah, I think it's somewhere right in here. And Hidden Lake is, that may even be Hidden Lake right there. It's not too far, and that's the thing, you need to, I would recommend, if you're interested in doing that, I would recommend that you buy that book, because you can get a sense of, oh, these lakes look interesting to me, and you can just live, you can just, rent a place to stay that's closest to the lakes that you want to go to. Because some of them are a bit of a drive. But again, this is it's a pretty good book, just, if nothing else, will give you the directions to the various places.
Did anybody come out to the lakes to check on you?
They didn't, and I'm not quite sure why. There was something going on. There was some kind of a tribal thing going on that kept them from coming in. But I was talking to a friend of mine who has fished these lakes for probably, he's in his 80s. He's fished these lakes for the last 50 years. He goes every year, and he was telling me that that's probably one of the very few things he hates about going there. Is he said he'll go, and he's fishing mission now pretty much exclusively. He said he'll go and somebody will come in and check his license in the morning, and the very same person will come back in the afternoon
Check it again?
and check his license, and it's kind of like, well, I don't think he's not that dumb that he doesn't know that he hasn't already checked it. He's like, he's just messing with me. And he said that happens a lot, so I guess they do check licenses a lot. And again, I'm okay with that. I mean, one of the things you need to do is, if you need to have your gear inspected for invasive species, you need to take that document with you at all times. So if someone stops to check their license and stuff, you can say, oh yeah, and I was inspected yesterday or whatever. The thing that I didn't fully understand about the gear check thing, and I still don't fully understand it, is they seem to want us to stop by every day, even if we were going nowhere else. If we were fishing only the reservation, they still wanted us to, at the very least, stop by every single day and say, yeah, we were just here yesterday and you checked us, and oh, okay, take off. It's like they didn't trust us to take a few days. They told us, I thought, that you needed to be inspected every 3 days, but then they told us they wanted to see us every day, and it was real confusing.
The Indians or the state of Montana?
The Indians. It was very confusing about what was going on there.
I could see where if you were going to different lakes, they'd want to check,
Between the
you're
lakes.
transferring something from one lake to another lake.
Yeah, and I could see that, especially if you were doing that outside the reservation, but we were exclusively fishing, we were almost exclusively fishing mission in the last few days, except for going to Forkhorn the last day. So, yeah, it was a little confusing, but by and large, I really enjoyed, don't misunderstand, I really enjoyed going to the lakes, and I thought that we could have done a whole lot better than we did, and I can't wait to get back there and actually, try some things.
So where you stayed, how was the food there?
Well, there was only one, as far as I know, one restaurant there, and it was pretty good food. I really liked it. And what was funny was, we became a regular after about 3 days, because there's nowhere else. We'd go there for breakfast, and then we'd, take a sandwich, and we'd come back and go there for lunch. We'd take our own sandwich, in the cooler, but we'd come back there for lunch. So we became regulars, and we ran into this one old guy, some kind of farmer, who was, asking what we were doing and how we were doing. And he liked me, so he gave me what he said was his favorite fly. And I put it on, and I cast it out there, and it didn't even sink to the bottom. And I had a fish on already, and I thought, wow, this is absolutely perfect. And then I fished it for 2 more hours, didn't catch any other fish. So, and it was sort of like what I
Well, the
showed
sprinkle had
earlier.
worn off after that first fish.
Well, I guess, but it was not unlike this. It was basically, it had a peacock thorax on it. It had actually a little tail with a, you know, a little pheasant fiber tail on it. And it had just a similar sort of a dubbing, you know, lower body. And it didn't have this big wing case on it like that. But they seemed to like peacock, but they seemed like any fly that had peacock on it seemed to catch fish. And I'm not quite sure whether they were taking it as a mayfly nymph, whether they were using this Dahlbach, whether they were using this because it looked sort of like a scud, or it sort of, you know, looked like a dark mayfly nymph. I'm not sure, but you know, they seem to like stuff with peacock in it for sure. We got to the point where we were taking all the flies we had that had peacock in them and sort of cutting stuff out we didn't think was any good, you know. And in many cases they were pretty well.
Well, some of those pictures you can see for a long ways, and I don't think I saw one tree.
Yeah, I don't know that there was one today. I mean, there you go.
That's the prairie.
Yeah, across the Dakotas and
That's
stuff
buffalo
like that.
country, that's buffalo country, big time.
Yeah, it is. So, you know, lots of fun and gosh, I wish I had a job that took me or a reason to go into Montana regularly, because I would be fishing Blackfeet country a little bit for sure. It's fabulous. I'm looking through here trying to think, was there a tree? And I think there was
Photoshop.
Well, you see in the background of the mountains and the foothills there?
trees.
there.
Trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, you'd have a certain altitude where, you know, there'd be a tree line, but there's certainly in the plains areas that we were at, there certainly weren't any
Nothing to stop the wind.
trees. Yeah, and that was the bad part. But again, you know, you just need to prepare for it. And the one warning that I wanted to give, and I hope it stuck, is don't take a pitiful, you know, backpacking float tube. This just can't stand up to the high winds. You need something better than that.
Did you ever see anything coming off like at 1:30, any kind of hatch coming off at all? Any fish rising at all?
I saw Calbatus coming off with, and that was the odd thing, is you'd see something come up and grab what you were sure was a Calbatus, and then you'd see another one, you know, 3 minutes later, and maybe 10 minutes after that. You never saw, oh man, okay, the hatch is on and they're just boiling and they're just all over the surface. And that was just odd to me, because you'd see enough of the mayfly nymphs, see enough of them hatching and just sort of drifting by you, but there weren't a million fish that were coming
You
up.
didn't try any ants or anything like that?
I did not try any ants, and that would have been a good, that actually
That would have been a good.
would have been a good thing. And I would think especially even a little later in the year, it was too early for hoppers and stuff like that, but I would, it's gotta be a good place for terrestrials, there's no doubt about that.